Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back to the Starcraft 2 Own It Shack. It is David here bringing you Master League Quest episode 31. And before I get into this episode, as I always seem to have an announcement to make before Master League Quest episodes, I just want to draw attention to my very new channel background. You may have noticed it. If you have not, please go check out my channel right now and take a look. It is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much to 9Live Cinema for making this channel background for me. He made my last one as well, if you're not aware, and he does an absolutely wonderful job. Just excellent work. I'm going to link his channel into the description, and if you're interested in channel backgrounds, you should really go subscribe to him because he's, in my opinion, one of the best there is on YouTube. So thanks again to 9Live Cinema. Really appreciate that. Now, as for this cast, I do want to first apologize for the fact that there was a bit of a delay between this episode and my last. As I said, I did go on vacation and now I'm back, so I'm going to be able to make a few more videos here before this semester really picks up in the workload department. Now, this is a Terran vs. Terran, and I know it's been so long since I brought you a Terran vs. Protoss, and I promise you the next Master League Quest episode will be a Terran vs. Protoss, but right now that matchup is giving me some qualms, so unfortunately I'm going to need to work out a few things there before I can actually show you some, acceptable Terran vs. Protoss gameplay. So for this game, I'm going to be going for my standard build. It's a 1 barracks into reactor Hellion expand, followed by a quick starport. So it's pretty much the safest middle of the road build you can do, in my opinion. It pretty much blocks everything, actually. I mean, the things that you have the most trouble with this build are things like really fast siege mode pushes from your opponent, but of course, if you scout properly, these things should never actually do damage to you. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Of course, it did mess up the orbital there. This is actually only my second game, I think, since coming back from vacation. So unfortunately, what happens there is some of the timings are a bit messed up. Some of the, actions per minute can actually decline quite a bit just because of rustiness. And right now I'm scouting his base. Basically, I'm going to be looking for how many gases he's taken, as well as if there's a tech lab on that barracks. The one thing that my build does have some trouble with are Reaper builds. If your opponent gets probably, I'd say, 3 to 4 Reapers and runs into your base with them and your Hellions are out on the map, you can lose an enormous amount of SCVs. So it's very important that you scout for something like that. And if you scout it, you need to make sure that you don't just, throw your Hellions out on the map somewhere for no purpose. You need to take care of those Reapers first, or at least have the Hellions in position to block them from somewhere on the outside of your base. So that's pretty much what my goal is going to be here in the early game. Just scout what he's doing and react accordingly, which is what this build is truly great for, in my opinion. So I will be throwing down that command center. This is to a T, that reactor Hellion expand in Terran vs. Zerg. It's the exact same build until the starport comes up, essentially. So I'll be swapping the factory onto the reactor created by that barracks. And I also just want to point out another thing here. For whatever reason, Fraps was just lagging me very badly during this game. It might not even have been Fraps, actually. It could have just been a connection problem. But there was about I'd say half a second delay between my clicks and when the action actually occurred on screen. So unfortunately, it did mess up my micro and macro a little bit here. So if you see just buildings being placed randomly in the wrong spot and that kind of thing, do keep in mind that this game was played with a considerable amount of lag. Could have been some combination of factors, actually. Maybe my opponent had a bad connection as well as myself. So I'll be throwing down a tech lab on that barracks and taking my second refinery as well. Second refinery is taken after the starport has been thrown down, and this is basically so that you can get siege tanks or a Raven out depending on what your opponent is doing. So what he's doing right now, I see a Hellion, and that's not all I see. I see the SCV as well, but because I see only one Hellion, I know he's not doing reactor Hellions, but it makes me suspicious about some sort of Reaper play. I know I scouted the factory, but you gotta be careful, I guess. Obviously, if I had thrown out a scan, I would know exactly what he's doing. And this is what, like I said, the lag really messing me up here. Delays things slightly, but It's not a huge deal. So I decide, I believe, to make a Raven. Yes, I do. The Raven is probably the safest route you can go. It's going to protect you from Banshees, and it's really useful later on if they go for bio and you're going for mech. And obviously, I think it goes without saying at this point that I am going for mech in Terran versus Terran. You will not see me go for Marine tank in this matchup, ever. And yeah, that's all I have to say. So I throw it on a scan, and fortunately for me, I see that he has 2 starports right now, with a barracks, 2 gas, and a factory, and this really makes me a little bit nervous, to be honest. The first thing I think here is that he's going to be going for that Iacoic style 2 factory, 2 starport play with Hellions and Banshees, and I hate going up against that. It really irritates me. It's frustrating to deal with. It's easy to beat once you know how, but to be honest, I still haven't really figured that out. And I'll be throwing down the Armory and Engineering Bay because I do think he is going for that style. The Armory is to get a Thor, and the Engineering Bay is to get turrets to protect against the Banshee. So there's his first Banshee, and I have the Raven out, so Cloak is not going to be an issue. Although the second gas, I don't believe it was taken fast enough for him to be getting Cloak. So yeah. So there the Banshee comes. I have 2 Vikings on the way because I did swap that starport onto the reactor. Great thing. Unfortunately, it takes out the SCV that was constructing my Armory, and that's a huge deal, in fact, because it's going to delay my upgrades as well as any potential Thor that I might have wanted to get to deal with those large amounts of air units coming out of 2 starports. Remember that when you're going for mech, you absolutely need the air control in order to prevent him from dropping on your siege tanks, as well as to push forward with your own siege tanks. So if he has 2 starports and you have 1 and he gets more air units than you, you're pretty much screwed, so you need that Thor. Now this is all assuming he is going for that style, that Iacoic style, but that has yet to be scouted with 100% confidence, so I will be now taking that low ground expansion. Gases probably could have been a little early. As you can see, I'm getting somewhat gas blocked right now while my minerals do stack up, and that is of course also a result of getting later siege techs. So second factory is now going down, and because he did get such fast starports, I feel the necessity to drop a ton of missile turrets just to protect against those drops. With mech, it really is never a bad idea to get extra missile turrets just to make sure that you're not caught out of position by a Hellion drop or drop of Marines and Marauders. So I will be getting a 3rd base with those extra minerals. Don't know if that was risky or not. I kind of feel like it was a good move just because I had so much extra minerals, might as well spend them on a command center. And excuse me, I do throw down an additional scan in order to see which tech route he goes, and right now it looks like he's just going to be going for the Marine Marauder style with some extra starports for, I would assume, additional medevacs and Vikings at this point. Obviously he didn't get Cloak, and he did stop Banshee production, so he throws down a scan on me as well. My Armory is now complete, and I should have started that +1 immediately after it completed, but looks like I did drop the ball a bit on that one. And my 3rd factory will now be going down. Not terrible timing, I feel, on these 3 factories, but obviously this build is not yet refined. Once it is refined, by the way, I will be posting the build order for you. I do like to get the build order down to probably about the point where you're fully producing off of 2 bases. That's where I like to stop my build orders. But I don't really have this one down pat to there quite yet, so it should be a while until that comes out. And furthermore, with a build like this, it's very reactionary, so it depends a lot on what your opponent's doing, so it can deviate significantly depending on what strategy he goes for. He or she. No offense to any female viewers I may have. I do believe I have, from my demographics, about 6%, but I'm not sure if those are actually 10-year-old boys pretending to be girls. Probably are. Anyway, back to the game. As you can see, got my 3 factories out now, and I will be relocating that sensor tower to that position just so I can scout for drops a little bit easier. And we'll be floating that over probably a little bit early on floating that over. Need to make sure he's not camping out there first, so I send a Hellion out to scout. +1 is now on the way, and siege tech I believe is complete, so I can now send these bad boys out there. Add those to my control groups. Check out my mech army hotkey video if you are confused about how you should hotkey your mech army. I do believe I have cracked the code when it comes to successfully hotkeying a full Terran mech army, especially in Terran versus Terran. So with that base up, I can now transfer SCVs. I feel like I feel like I should have had more SCVs at this point. My SCV production probably was not constant. As far as I'm aware, it should be able to be fully saturated at this point with constant SCV production off 2 bases, but could be wrong there. And I'm going to be throwing up some missile turrets right there just to ensure that he cannot drop this base. So, as you can see by the mini-map, we've actually both placed sensor towers in the exact same location. But I'm going to take a little gamble here and use a medevac I produced to do a blue flame Hellion drop. Thank you very much for whoever suggested that. I believe one of you gave me that advice to try some blue flame Hellion drops, and so I will be doing that. And actually, in fact, sadly, I have to admit that this was not a blue flame Hellion drop, but it was actually a red flame Hellion drop because I forgot to research that infernal pre-igniter. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Should have definitely been more on top of it. But if you don't open blue flame, it's kind of hard to squeeze those extra resources into that upgrade. Now, lucky for me, he actually was sloppy there and didn't put a turret down. So these Hellions are going to get in here and do an absolutely enormous amount of damage. As you can see, I take out a huge line of SCVs, and he lines up the second wave for me quite nicely as well. Take them all out, and now I can even start doing more damage at the natural. Sadly, there was quite a bit of game lag right here, and I botched the micros, so I didn't kill nearly as much as I should have. Yeah, the stutter step micro really gets tough when you have a little latency there. And furthermore, I supply block myself to the ends of the earth, so another bad thing. And he has actually started to make a little outpost in front of my base. I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest with you, because if he's going for marine tank with some siege tanks, sure, it's hard to break out of at first, but once I get my max army with, 25 siege tanks or so, it should be what I get. It's going to be almost impossible for him to stop that push towards his base if he doesn't have a bunch of marauders in there as well. And right now he has only got marines, so I will be able to leapfrog successfully onto his siege line and just completely decimate those tanks and force him back. I'll also be adding a second starport now. My thought for that second starport was to make Banshees, but once this happens, as you're going to see, I realize he has an enormous amount of Vikings right now, and I'll save that Raven, by the way. And as such, because of that, I need to retreat, and I need to actually use that second starport for Viking production instead. So that's what I will be doing right there. And I'll also be adding some missile turrets, knowing that he has temporary air dominance. Can't let him get those Vikings in to siege push me. Obviously, that sounds a little silly, because siege pushing someone with more siege tanks than you simply doesn't make sense. Those two additional factories, putting up to 5 factories, did come down after the third base was up and running, by the way. So I'll be storing all my air units over there in the safety of those missile turrets, repair it with a couple of SCVs. I should be shift queuing here a lot more, as many of you have pointed out. And yeah, I'll just be building up those Viking counts. Got an additional armory back at home that I forgot to mention, and that's just for those extra upgrades. Really, when you're turtling off 3 bases, you can afford that because you're not in a huge rush to reach your max, but it is somewhat important that you push before you allow him to get his infrastructure up for producing more siege tanks than you. Now, I'm going to try a little sneaky tactic here and run a few Hellions by. Something you can do easily on this map, Antiga Shipyard. Because of its architecture, the middle does not block these run-by paths, and I will be putting them right up here, but wisely he has actually funneled them into a planetary with those supply depots. Great SimCity by my opponent there, and so I'll instead be forced to go to the natural. Unfortunately, he has learned from his mistakes and put a siege tank there, and that's going to prevent this from doing all that much damage. But at this point, I'm really just trying to sacrifice Hellions in order to free up supply for more siege tanks. So right now it looks like I have 18 based on my hotkey right there. Hotkey 2 says 18. And I will be scanning once more just to make sure that he's not getting too many siege tanks out there. And I see that right now I've just got too many Hellions. They're not going to do anything. He hasn't really continued much marine production as far as I can tell from that scan. And thus those are wasted supplies, so I'm going to try and take out a few siege tanks with them. And I'll show you in a sec how exactly I do this. Also could have used some in that medevac, but unfortunately my APM did drop a little bit here, as it normally does in the late game when I get a little bit confused as to what to do. I've also floated a command center up to that top sort of top right position, the 2 o'clock base, and I will be dropping a few mules over there and trying to clear this out. Once I clear this out, I can start sending my SCVs over there to mine. But until that time, unfortunately, not going to really be possible. I've also started more upgrades, double upgrades on those double armories, and this is the point that I was talking about. I'm going to be sending these Hellions over here, get them right, wedge them right between 2 siege tanks for an easy 2 kills. Totally worth it in my opinion to sacrifice those Hellions for 2 siege tanks, allowing myself to replace them with probably an additional 3 siege tanks, putting me up to an endgame goal of, as I said before, 25 siege tanks. I'll also be creating a planetary right there, and I'm pretty sure, if I haven't already, I will be getting that high-sec auto-tracking upgrade. I suggest all you mech players get that every matchup. High-sec auto-tracking and building armor. Very, very important upgrades when you're going for mech. So now I have so many siege tanks that I can't start siege pushing. I don't know what I'm waiting for right now. I'm just hotkeying everything. It does take a while with mech, and at this point I should actually be building more. Yeah, there we go, another starport just to start that battlecruiser production. Another great tip I got on some of my videos while I was on vacation, I believe, or possibly before that. Thank you once again. Battlecruisers obviously very important to finish him off when you come to a position in the game where siege tank lines are colliding. So I'll unsiege all these siege tanks and start my little push. We'll bring back my superior air force as well, and as you can see, what you want to do to siege push someone is attack where they're I can't really explain it, right where their siege line ends essentially. This way you can actually fire with more siege tanks than they can fire back at you on, and thus kill more than they kill of you. Now because he has 2 Thors in there, I need to be very careful and keep my air force back and simply rely on scans as my vision. 1 Thor volley on those Vikings could be absolutely devastating in the following air battles, so it's very important that I let the siege tanks deal with that and use scans. So there another scan goes, and I'll be pushing these siege tanks forward as well. So doing actually what I'd call a pretty decent job of siege tank pushing this biomech player. And now that the Thors are dead, I'll move my Vikings in, take out some Ravens, drop the point defense drone. Right after that, you always want to bring your Raven back so it doesn't die. And I'll just take an enormous air advantage right here and move my siege tanks up even further. At this point, siege mode is not really necessary because there are no marauders in his mix. And yeah, that went actually, I'd say, probably as well as it could have for one of my, I'd say that was one of my best siege tank pushes ever. Even if it did look sloppy to you, I assure you it's not one of my skills in this matchup. So I actually feel quite ahead, and sadly, stupid mistake here. Bad Sim City by myself, blocking siege tanks, and they're going to have to lift that factory. This does delay my push slightly, and oh man, that's so frustrating to watch. Lift the factory, David. Oh, there we go. So I actually have, I believe, 31 siege tanks. That's disgusting. That is going to shred through everything he has. And with 2 armories, are you kidding me? This is actually going to be extremely powerful and hard for him to stop. Now, sadly, if I had actually sent Hellions around the map at this point to scout for his expansions, I could have done terrible, terrible damage to them. Instead of simply sacrificing siege tanks to kill his army like this. Not really worthwhile in my opinion. Should have absolutely been trying to kill his expos first before doing this nonsense. But this is why, you know, you do Master League Quest episodes. It's because you're not in Master League yet. And now that I've taken care of his army, I will actually be transferring SCVs over to that 4th base. And I'm sure many commenters have already posted this. I should have had more command centers already. I fully acknowledge that I should have actually built probably 3 or 4 extra CCs right now. Or, to be honest, even 3 minutes ago. And floated those over, and sadly, oh, huge blunder by myself, sending those SCVs into a large group of bio. I'd say the only saving grace to that little hiccup was that I did scout his base up there, so I'll be sending my army, you know, to the northeast base to take this out. Also, make sure that you keep those Vikings back. No need to siege when it's against really small groups of bio. Against this whole army of biomech, obviously you need to siege then. and I will be eradicating this base from the face of the earth. Very easy to do. And obviously, as any good bio player will do, he's going for a counterattack. Absolutely infuriating. I hate this part of playing against bio players. Seems like everyone on the ladder plays bio. And actually, I have to admit, this is very smart by him. He did set up a little soft contain on my army, but with the amount of siege tanks I have here, it's not really going to matter. Fortunately, I do scout an additional base and his starports. This was actually probably one of the most defining moments of this game. Scouting those starports allowed me to kill what he, as far as I can assume, was planning on oh my gosh, I'm botching this sentence. I'm assuming he was trying to go for battlecruisers there. So by killing those starports, I really did put myself ahead in the endgame arms race here in Terran versus Terran that we oftentimes see. And I think I'll be taking that last starport out. Oh, no, never mind. He tries to do a little stim, but obviously against, I believe I'm at like 2-2 now or something. That is not going to work. Now, I have actually got myself in a tiny bit of a pickle here. Going to have to sacrifice some siege tanks to move out, but just as I think that's going to be necessary, by the way, first battlecruiser is now out, he decides to go for my third, and I feel like this was actually a mistake by him. He trapped his army in there when I have more siege tanks and that battlecruiser. In fact, I don't have to waste any siege tanks here in order to take this out. I can just send my battlecruiser in there and let him clean up everything. He doesn't have enough marines in his composition at this point to deal with it. And as you can see, all that's left are siege tanks. Unfortunately, he does kill that third base, but with that additional command center I built right there, dropping a few mules, I should be able to, in fact, repopulate and salvage my economy in that way. I've also created an additional starport that's going to be for dual battle cruiser production. A stupid move by me. I get impatient and send my siege tanks up there. Very uncharacteristic of me. I'm usually much more patient than that. But, you know, sometimes you just want to win a game fast when you know you have an advantage. Or at least when you assume you have an advantage. Obviously, he's killed my third base, and I've killed his fourth and fifth bases. But I also know that I have a way better army than him at this point. So I'm going to be using that to my advantage and sending it right at him with forward scans to make sure that I'm not going to get flanked or run into like 200 supply worth of marauders. So I don't think, yeah, I'm not going to bother actually rebuilding that third base at that location simply because I've already mined most of it. Instead, I'm going to be taking the gold base, as you can see. So because he's sieged up there, I will take the liberty of breaking down his rocks and getting a really nice position on his third base. And that's actually a great thing to do when your opponent's sieged up. If you have more siege tanks, moves like this can be really, really powerful. So, my battlecruiser's now reached here, and I do scan. You always have to scan there just to make sure that you know where his army is. If you get flanked with mech, it's just bad news bears. So make sure that you always keep tabs on that. I'm going to finish off his planetary before dealing with that army. And a few siege tanks sieged up right there should probably kill that in one volley, and boom, there it goes down. Yeah, he just forced a cancel there on my gold base, and that's actually pretty huge because I didn't bother building those extra command centers. As I said earlier, that's going to take time to rebuild instead of simply floating one over. Errors by myself, proving why I am still indeed in Diamond League. Also, a little mistake there, endgame mistake, typical endgame mistake, is I forgot to pull my SCVs when his Vikings landed there just because I was so flustered with everything else that was going on. Now he doesn't have very many siege tanks in this composition, so I can simply push up here and crush this tiny little counterattack. But you know, he's delayed my push. He's most likely taken bases again. And what I have going for myself right now is my superior siege tank count and that battlecruiser, or those two battlecruisers now. So, as such, I'll be taking advantage of that. I'm going to try to get some more SCVs there. And right now, what I should have actually done, pardon me, is take my main base and float that over to the gold and use that, because honestly, when everything's mined out at a base, including your gas, it doesn't make sense to have that there. No need to spend 400 extra minerals. So, I've also sent a nice little siege tank over to my third base right now in order to protect against further Viking and bio harassment there. Oh god, that was painful to watch. I actually flew the Raven into a missile turret right there. Very, very huge blunder. That's actually quite huge because you need that Raven for point defense drone when you eventually engage the Marauders. So big mistake right there. Never ever let that happen. And as you can see, I don't even have enough gas to replace that Raven right now. So very large mistake by myself. Not really showing a great play right there. Now I will be scanning ahead. Wisely, he has actually replaced a lot of his army with siege tanks, but of course, when you are replacing with siege tanks against a mech player, he will have more than you, and that is indeed the case right now. And with those battle cruisers, he's forced to make Marines because he obviously can't take air control since I have way more Vikings. So the battle cruisers will do their work here on the siege tanks, also Yamato, a couple of them right there, and bring the Marines back into fire range of my siege tanks. I'll also be starting more upgrades. Those were the air upgrades, I believe, because I think I have 3-3 on my mech by this point. Or at least 3-2. Now, I will be taking that additional base. As I said before, should have floated my main over there. But, alas, did not do that. So, that's what happens. And another annoying thing is I always seem to misplace these things initially and click the wrong building. So instead of floating it to the gold, I'll float it over here instead, as you can see. And with this nice little contain up, I feel like it's pretty much game over for him. I've teched successfully to battle cruisers. I have the superior siege tank count, which is really what matters in Terran versus Terran. And I actually have secured additional bases. Now he does send a medevac over there, but I spot it with my mini-map, so I'll be sending just 1 or 2 Vikings over there to deal with that. And with the siege tank already positioned there, he shouldn't be able to do too much damage. I believe I sent an additional siege tank to protect that base. So, pretty much have this game locked down. Now it's all a matter of just waiting for him to tap out or pushing forward and forcing him to. So I'll be taking out that medevac, just not really focusing too hard on high APM at this point. Just allowing, you know, things to pan out as they eventually will in Terran versus Terran. It's often how this matchup goes. Siege tank should be, yep, cleaning up those Marines, then sieging up. And yeah, I just keep scanning, make sure he's not pulling any sneaky moves. I realize at this juncture that with only that, well, he's basically working off his bank. He has no mining left, so because of that, it's quite, pretty much he's got one last ditch attempt to break this, and if he doesn't, it's going to be game. So he tries, sees that he just doesn't have enough, and taps out for the GG. So another win by myself. Obviously, I do post losses as well, but I've actually been playing very well recently, and I haven't been losing much at all, so no losses to report, which is very good. I'm making my way up. I'm actually playing probably the best I ever have nowadays, so it's great to see that I'm getting back into form when, you know, I obviously had a little bit of a hiatus there. So as you can see, my own division, I am ranked, looks like 46th with 21 wins. Sadly, I got placed in a really hard division, so the top guy's way up there. I will never be top 8 with the amount I play. But anyway, that does it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again for another daily dose of Own It.